So, who are you and what do you do?
I am by trade and training a high performance psychologist, and I'm fortunate to spend time with the best in the world, helping them be just a little bit better at what they care most about.
That's great. You're Dr. Mike Gervais. You're also the author of The First Rule of Mastery, your first book, correct?
That is, yes.
What was that like for you?
It was, I think it was easier than maybe for most, and I'll tell you why that's the case, is that I was inspired to write an article, and I wrote an article for HBR about what I think is one of the great constrictors of human potential, this obsessive fear, this obsessive worry about what people think of us. So I wrote this article on HBR, and 12 months later, they called and said, "Hey, you were the number one downloaded article for the last 12 months in a row. What do you think we write a book?" And so they already knew by their platform that I had touched the nerve in their community. So I already had a true north, and I already had a direction, and it was now adding interesting stories and compelling science to support the hypothesis that this fear of other people's opinions is one of the great constrictors of our potential.
Yeah, I love the acronym for sure. We have FOMO, the fear of missing out, and you've got this FOPO. You call it FOPO, Mike? Is that
Yeah,
what you
it is.
do?
It's FOPO,
Okay.
and that's meant to be kind of just fun,
Yeah, it's
you know.
great.
Yeah.
That's great. So let's talk about some of the ingredients that have led to this, because I think about this a ton. I'm very hesitant with a lot of the things that I do. And I think for me, it comes from my background in journalism, where I respect that publishing button probably a little more than most. Meaning, if I hit publish on something, whether it's a post on X or an article or a podcast, I feel that it has to go through a certain system, that we have so much content out in the world that I want to be respectful of people's feed. And I know the more I amplify and the more I replicate and duplicate and go rah, 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 I'd get probably more access. But I still have that restrictive feeling of respecting the publishing button. And I'm wondering if you think about it in that way as well, this idea that maybe we are oversharing is another word we'll often use, maybe as not an antidote to FOPO, but something people think about.
100%. I love when I hear you say that, I hear a high standard. And standards are something that we can ascribe ourselves and determine and discern what standards we want to live by. And so we learn those standards from time under tension, from experience, from mentors, and from our values that we want to live in accordance with. And so standards are incredibly important. And I do think that we can raise the level of standards for whatever we're doing. And that's part of the path of mastery. It's part of what I wanted to point to in this recent book. The first rule of mastery is what is the right level of standard to work from, and not expectations. That's very different. Those words can commingle, but standards are the essence of how you line your thoughts, words, and actions up. What is the standard relative to a virtue or a value, and what is the standard towards a sense of proficiency and or mastery? And it sounds like you've got really high standards for what you want your community to consume from a thought provoking perspective, as well as like how you want to influence the way that they spend their time. And so I love standards. I think that they are incredible. I get concerned about expectations.
So, talk about the expectations and what you mean is the differentiator there.
Yeah. So expectations are oftentimes we okay. Oftentimes we pretend and we play this little game like it's my expectations of myself, but expectations are often learned from other people and learned from a wider culture. So you're expected to be a certain way, typically is something that comes from an external resource. A self-digested or metabolized set of standards is something that can come from within. And so that's basically the difference between the two. Expectations create this interesting little evaporating pressure that takes place. And standards are like a mark of was I true and honest with the way that I presented my thoughts, my words, my ideas. And so standards just have a different feel. There's more weight to it. There is a different level. There's a different type of pressure that comes with standards versus expectations. But expectations, when I say this evaporative form, meaning that we're not quite sure where they come from and why they matter so much, but standards are something that you can own, and expectations are something that people have placed on you.
And where do you sit when you think about context? The idea of what is the context of this thing that I'm producing, that I'm sharing with the world? Does it resonate with the end goal that I'm trying to accomplish? So you could make the comparison that I could obviously easily share on my Instagram account what I'm eating for lunch, but the context of my audience, or at least the one I'm trying to establish a connection with, would be more, let's say, business related, as it might be. Do you think about context that even as people are constantly expressing themselves or thinking about it, that a lot of times what I see is more self promotion or self patting on the back versus something that's going to add value to any form of communication?
Oh, yeah. I mean, culture and context are so rich and so important. And being a community member of a community that you want to be part of, whether you're curating it, co-creating it, leading, or participating in some way, it's like the idea of like, how do I want to represent myself and help create and shape a culture that I'm part of are really important. So context matters so much. And this is the part about the human experience that is so complicated, is that we are multifaceted, multidimensional, and what might work to solve a problem or challenge today, the exact same solution tomorrow might be wildly off mark. And so context and culture are so important to understand. And this is why I, I think that some of the most dynamic humans on the planet ask more questions than have absolute truths that they're working from. And so it's the question gathering that is trying to understand the unique experience of the individual. So the context and the culture that performance or that expression of an idea is working uniquely from. And so some of the most dynamic people and certainly some of the best coaches, and when I say coaches, I'm thinking sport coaches and or leaders, they tend to ask really deep, rich questions to gather information to better understand the context and the culture of what's taking place.
Yeah, one of my good friends, Michael Bungay Stanya, I don't know if you know him, who wrote the book The Coaching Habit.
Yeah.
One of his greatest skills is the questions he asks. We'll spend time together, and I will just be writing down the questions he's asking versus thinking about how I'm going to answer them. He's so skilled at that.
Yeah, and the best questioners are they tend to have some rich investment in thinking about where they could take the conversation or what they really want to understand. So it's as much the question as you're dictating as it is what's happening right before the question is taking place. And so there's you can follow along the narrative of a conversation, and or you can try to understand the emotional component that the conversation is springing from.
Yeah.
So that's another layer of context, is like, what is the emotional content or experience, and where is that question pointing, and why was that choice made versus the 15 other questions that could have happened. And so when as a trained psychologist, the narrative of a story is far less interesting than the emotional fabric that it's coming from, and that why they chose to share the story in this way or the narrative about what's taking place. Like, it's the underneath, the invisible part, if you will, that is so fascinating to me.
I want to set some context for this, which is you've done extraordinary work with groups like the Seattle Seahawks and Red Bull, the Stratus team in particular, which is a fascinating story, Team USA, some incredible business leaders as well. I'm wondering, when you discovered this idea of fear of people's opinions, in particular, if you're dealing with people who are performing at such a high level, you would think that most of their focus is actually on themselves and their own performance versus what's happening externally. There seems to be a cracking of the code there that you uncovered that I'm curious about.
Well, I think what you might be pointing to there is that it's a first principle for me that I've learned from working with world's best, is that nobody does it alone. And so we are in relationships with each other. And even like Felix Baumgartner, who jumped from 130,000 feet. This is the Red Bull Stratos program project that you talked about.
People will remember it as jumping from space.
Jumping from outer space, right? Yeah. And it crashed the internet in 2012, and it was one of the most viewed things ever. And it was a project I was part of for 4 years. And yes, he was the only one on the 12-inch platform at 130,000 feet. And when he went to jump, if he were to move into some sort of flat spin where his head and his feet are rotating around each other, that he would land, but he would likely land as a vegetable. Or if he didn't quite move through the sound barrier in the right way, maybe his arms and his legs would rip off. Like it's real consequence that this thing. And yes, he was alone in his jump. However, nobody does it alone. There's a full team and a team within a team, and there's supporting teams, and he is a team member and a team leader. And so I think that's what you're pointing to, whether it's in sport, in art, and or in business. Nobody can do the extraordinary alone. And I've been fortunate to work with the senior leadership team at Microsoft over the last, I think 11 years, once Satya Nadella, the CEO, came into his position. And he's very, very clear, very quick to say, when he talks about the culture that he's working to shape and create, that it takes everybody to do it. And his entire leadership team and, the 200,000 people that are part of the ecosystem of Microsoft, is that, no, he didn't create the culture. He helped to establish with his team what some bellwethers will be, what a North Star could be, but it takes everybody to pull together to make something true and honest. And not that it's perfect, there is nothing like that, but the idea that nobody does it alone shows up in business, in the arts, and in sport. And it's the true masters that understand it. People that just jumped on the high performance treadmill and they just want to be a high performer, which is, I think, a step below mastery. They might let a little bit of narcissism get in there. They might let a little bit of like self-aggrandizing get in there. And certainly people that are just a rung below that, people that are performing well under pressure. So there is a way to dissolve pressure. And I think that's more of the reserve for mastery. But as you think about this stack, and I'll just kind of play with this stack of performance in a minute. At the low part, there's choking. So people choke, right? Then there's micro choking where you're just really tight. You got through it. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't graceful. People know that you struggle. You definitely struggled through it, but you got through it. There was a micro choking. Then there's performance. Then above that is performance under pressure. Then there's high performance. And then there's mastery. In that space of mastery, we are figuring out how to dissolve pressure. We're figuring out how to artistically express ourselves. And people that are on the path of mastery understand the importance and the fabric of relationships with themselves, with others, with Mother Nature, with machines, the relationship with experience in and of itself. And as you move down the stack, they think they're on stage alone, that they're the only ones, all eyes on me, the spotlight is on me. And that's where this undue felt pressure takes place for people. And so when you feel more of a part of the coral reef, talking about mastery now, it's very different than feeling like you're the only nail on this board and you're about to get hammered into the center of it, right? Like that's like an individual as opposed to part of a coral reef.
So tell me a little bit about the path to mastery then. People are performing at a high level. I think by nature, there's just been this feeling that everything we do is high stakes. I can even look at my kids and performance grade by grade and the pressure that there is versus when I would be at school. I'm thinking about people who feel like they have mastered things. They'll even claim in their LinkedIn profile that they are masters of X, Y, and Z. We're not talking about that. I'm wondering what the path looks like that you know you're in this area of high performance or you know you're heading towards mastery. Can we self-acknowledge that? Do we know?
Yeah. The fact that you're asking the question is really important. And so let me start more artistically, and I'm an applied scientist, but I like stories.
I'm more artistic and story based, so go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll start with the story to get to the science of it. Is that David Foster Wallace has this, one of the great writers, poets. He's got this beautiful insight about the story where there's an old fish swimming cross direction from two young fish. And so as the old fish passes by the two young fish, he says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And he just kind of swims off. And the two young fish, they don't say anything for a while. And then one has the courage to kind of lean over to the other fish and say, "What the hell is water?" Okay, so the old fish, the wise fish, if you will, was pointing to something that was so obvious. It was the thing that they're swimming in, that it was so obvious it was almost unobservable to the two young naive fish, right? And so if you think about the old one is on the path of mastery, understanding the basic elements of what's taking place, and the young fish are just kind of on there swimming and getting after it and trying to maybe look good or perform good or whatever. Okay, so there's the difference in there between the two. So how do you know? It's more about what are you pointing toward. So in high performance, you're pointing toward like celebrating excellence, celebrating winning and achievement, and being technically sound and being able to let it rip and get after it, right? Those are kind of phrases that might kind of come together for high performance or a high performing team. Mastery just has more depth. There's a bit more soul to it. What you're pointing to is a path of rich learning with artistic expression. So it's an inner directed approach towards life with an external expression that is artistic. And high performance is like, I'm doing the inner work so that I can, perform well and or perform better than others. And mastery is pointing at something very different. And I'm far more interested in the path of mastery, even though like my academic training is as a high performance psychologist. I'm reduced in label to the thing that I'm actually more interested in, which is mastery versus high performance.
When you say it like that, I wonder if it's somewhat of a privilege to be able to be in a position where you can pursue something like that. Have you thought about it in the context of where we're at in the world and how people are feeling about themselves and marginalization of people, how nationalistic we're becoming? Would you say that the pursuit of mastery is somewhat of a privilege to be able to do that?
No, yes and no. And so there's 300 million people in India, that don't have access to basic necessities, and there's 300 million people in America that are, doing just fine. So like almost the entire country of the United States in India doesn't have running water and gas. So I'm aware of the sensitivity in your question, and I'm aware of the discrepancies between access in the United States. But it's a yes and so it's a yes to the sensitivity that once we have basic necessities met, then there is a rite of passage. There is a adulthood that comes into play. Like, what are you going to do with your time? And if you're spending the majority of your time figuring out like, where are you going to sleep tonight and how am I going to feed my children today, it's a very different narrative. And I would say that they are some of the most creative, resilient, uh, achieving, high-performing people on the planet. Those that are day to day with that level of stress, trying to figure out survival. We just don't value it. We don't point to it. We don't celebrate just how resourceful some of those folks are. We instead point to Olympians and professional athletes. And I think that there's a deep miss there. When we do point to the athletes that are, on the global stage, the opportunity is to look right below the surface. How do they organize their life? Let's not celebrate their physicality. Let's celebrate and understand how they fundamentally organize their life. To your point about privilege, what they have basic needs met, and they are fundamentally organizing their life to be a contributing member to a team. That means they need to be their very best so they can help others do the same. So So I want to express the understanding of like below basic needs and above basic needs, if there's a differentiation there. And the yes and is when you think about some of the historical greats, and you think about Mandela, and you think about Mother Teresa, and you think about Gandhi, and you think about the level of which those needs, how low of a level they had to live their life. They didn't live with the Rolex watches and you know the Mercedes Benzes of so it's a yes and and I think we have that line very confused, especially in the West. And I'll also not speak out of the same side of my mouth or the other side of my mouth, is that if you are afforded great luxuries, you do not need to be embarrassed by it. It's perfectly fine. But the rite of passage to the rich life, the good life, is how are you going to spend your time? Obsessing about buying something and looking good, or obsessing in a healthy way about being authentically you and helping create a difference across the lives of others. And if you can straddle that in a healthy way, it's awesome. And so it's a yes and it's not a simple answer. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
I
and
mean,
yeah,
it's commonplace to hear the idea that you should appreciate the experience, not the things. It's a common idea. There's something happening though culturally where we are seeing this vocation of influencer. It's cultural. Be a vocation. This idea that by simply showing and doing and buying and promoting is in and of itself some type of job, some type of thing that you've mastered, this clout chasing, if you will. Have you thought about that as well? Because there is something interesting there that it's almost like the celebrity sometimes will overtake the actual skill or performance.
100%. And we are in the West, I'll speak. We are obsessed with performance. We are a culture that is obsessed with how well we do whatever it is that we do. So it makes perfect sense to me that we would fall into an entire set of generational identity, which is a performance-based identity. And so for at least the last 5 decades or 5 generations, there is a performance-based identity that has sprung from the obsession of our culture on performance. And so that's the way I think about it. And is that when your identity is not pointing to who I am, but it points to how well I do something, and that how well is relative to how well you do something. So when my identity is commingling with how well I do something relative to you, now I've got something that is very complicated to live the good life, because I'm constantly measuring myself against how well other people are doing it. And then you add fuel to the flame of social media and the highlight reels of, the easy accessible highlight reels of other people's lives. It's no wonder that anxiety, depression, addiction, suicidality, physical health challenges are on a rapid rise. It is no wonder, because our core identity is not pointing to or experiencing the being part of humanness, but the doing well part. And so, yeah, a relationship with experience, maybe even if I could be as bold as saying a love affair with the unfolding moment, is really the mark of mastery. Having a love affair with the unfolding moment means completely giving myself to the unknown, because you and I both don't know how the unknown, how this next moment is going to go in this conversation. But when you pour yourself into it and you have that inner knowing that however this goes, I'll adjust. I'll figure it out to my best ability. And I trust myself enough to risk enough to be part of the slipstream of life, to have a relationship with this experience. And that, when we go back to athletes for just a moment, they're great at this. They know they can't control the outcome. They know they can't control how it's going to go. And they still, in practice, more than the game is on, in practice, they still get right to the messy edge where they're not all buttoned up. And they do that in game time as well. And they do it in front of their peers. They do it in front of expert coaches. They do it in context that if they don't get it right, they move down the depth chart. They could be moved off the team quickly. In the NFL, it stands for not for long. And so like moving right down that slipstream in a quote unquote high pressured experience, being vulnerable and giving yourself to the unfolding unknown. Most of us have incredible anxiety with that. The unknown is so dangerous and alarming and concerning that we don't trust ourselves enough to know that we can adjust and adapt in line with our values and virtues, knowing that that adjustment is part of what mastery is really about.
It always made me laugh in professional sports or think about this idea that you're doing your job and everybody, including your family and friends, are showing up to see you do your work. Like there is a weird thing about audience or anybody who has work that is fundamentally based on there being an audience. My parents, family members have come to see me speak, but in general, they don't. I'm at a business conference somewhere. It's not open for tickets for the public to come in. There's no guest lists, boxes, things like that. There's got to be something unique about human psychology when your profession is such that everybody is there, not just strangers to judge you, but your own family members at work.
It actually is incredibly comforting for most of
Oh,
them. And here's how this goes is that, and think about if this is the case for you. So we talk about this in the first rule of mastery is that many of us are public figures, and we were public figures 200 years ago, but the circle is just a little bit smaller, and we knew our tribe better than we know them now. And so this idea of being public is not new. It's just a little bit larger than it was before, and we don't know the people in the community. Okay. When you go and you're going to go on a stage, whether it's a small room or a big stage, most people report, and I'll be curious if this is the case for you, most people report that presenting to a room of 15 crusty, hardened experts in the thing that you're talking about, they have scar tissue. They've seen these frames of reference multiple times. They know the content of what you're talking about. That can be more overwhelming as an experience versus a 3,000 person audience or a 13,000 person audience where you don't know. You assume that they maybe know, but maybe they don't, and they're there for a different reason. And which one is a little bit more intimidating or electric for you? Which one has more stakes on the line?
candidly, if I think about that as an example, it's forcing me to think about framework.
Mm-hmm.
So my framework going into the crusty room is train the trainer, which is a different mindset than I have information that this audience doesn't know, and my job here is to really illuminate it in a way in which they could take it and act upon it. So I actually think that I frame it differently on the onset so that I can get to maybe a better personal result because I'm probably dealing at some point on both with my FOPO at that point.
Yeah, the fear of people's opinions. Yeah. So the framing, let's start with the framing for a minute, and then I'll get to the punchline. The framing is material important. I love that you went to the framing because if you're going to go into a stage, whatever it is, small room, big room, it doesn't matter, and you're coming into that conversation focusing on yourself, again, like the single nail on a board, and
that's anxiety
the spotlight.
inducing.
Yeah. So that's going to produce a survival tactic. Like, I better be good or I'm going to get kicked out of this tribe. And that's the origin of FOPO, is that our brains are designed for survival. We understand the fight, flight, freeze mechanism. If there was a saber tooth, a wildebeest, or somebody running towards us with, violence in their body posture or a gun or whatever, we understand that we're supposed to mobilize quickly for survival. But what is missed in this narrative, we've got this ancient brain in modern times, and 200,000 years ago, if you and I were in the same tribe and we kept screwing up, or we kept making jokes in a weird way and embarrassing people, or we were responsible for hunting or gathering in a certain way, and we kept coming back empty-handed. At some point, if we were a problem, too much of a problem, the elders of the tribe say, "Hey, listen, you guys got to go out of here."
Right.
And that was a near-death sentence, because now you and maybe you have a spouse and a couple kids and maybe a cousin, and I've got maybe like 2 people on my side. So the 7 of us are going to go try to fend and fight and hunt and gather and build a fire and protect. And it's too much. It was a near-death sentence. So the approval of other people is very important. Safety is belonging. And we are highly skilled at picking out the slightest of rejection. And this is the whole treatise of the book. Just picking out the slightest of rejection, we will do very predictable things. We'll conform, we'll contort, our body will heat up, we'll maybe critique that person or critique others to try to be on the inside. There's a very predictable cascade of things that take place behaviorally, psychologically, and emotionally. Okay, so to your point, the framing bit, if you can get outside of yourself, and whether you're walking to a small room or a large room, and you say, and the framing is, what an absolute honor it is to be able to share things that I've been thinking a lot about for the last 20 years. And I'm grateful, I'm excited, and you start to frame it differently about that you're going to pour into what you know. And you've freed yourself from a performance-based identity to a purpose-based identity. So from to here is from performance-based to purpose-based. And then you frame the experience with gratitude and optimism and opportunity as opposed to threat management, identity management. It is the delta between those two is radical and freeing. And the best in the world historically are purpose-based and are pouring into the center and inviting people to be part of a community as opposed to look at me, look how special I am. And so that framing is materially important.
There's an interesting paradox, I think, there, which I think about the music business. I was in the music business for many years. Some might argue still have a little toenail in it as well. And I think about artists who spend X amount of their career getting ready for that first album. They have a massive hit. They tour, sell millions of albums. Then they have to go and do the sophomore record, which is also known as the sophomore jinx.
The slump. Yeah.
Or you'll have artists that are extremely successful and can maintain through the sophomore slump and persevere, but then get caught in this idea that, is this the type of music that a fan of ours would like? And I see this more than anything else. I see this in particular even with individual friends of mine who are professionals. They went to school, they got a degree, they perform at a high level, but they're doing it almost not as a way to excel at mastery, but because they're just simply got good at it versus opening it up. It's almost like the audience, whether it's your boss, whether it's your team members, whether it's your actual audience in front of 20,000 people in an arena, it's hard to almost evolve. Like you stay locked within what you think the expectation is.
There it is. So you just brought full circle the expectation bit. Yeah. Versus your standard of tuning your thoughts, words, and actions in some sort of poetic harmony for the message that you want to convey or the feeling you want to express. Yeah. So that's where artistry happens, when you can line up under any condition, under like whether you're, any condition. That can you line up your thoughts, words, and actions and express from an authentic place? That is the mastery of self meets mastery of craft. Okay. So to your point about like the golden handcuffs of expectations from others. Yeah. So I was, I'm friendly with the CEO of Nike. And John sits down and he just came off of he was a CEO of PayPal, and he just had this radical success. And this was early days for him. And he says, I've got some golden handcuffs here. I think he was in a transition period between what he was going to do next. And he says, I kind of want to go and do art and photography, but I've got these expectations and this golden handcuff that I've got this real talent on how to lead multinational organization. And so there is a golden handcuff, a golden cage of success, if you're not careful, that you speak to the approval of your community, as opposed to do what they loved about you is you spoke your truth.
Exactly.
And so this is where it gets really confusing. As soon as there is any level of success, and you've got other people that are advising and counsel that maybe they haven't been around this level of success before, and they're in it new with you, that it would be natural to want to belong to the community that is already giving you praise, financially or otherwise, as opposed to say, no, we got to keep staying on the frontier. We got to make our own music as opposed to the music that they want from us. And it is hard to do.
So
It is
hard.
and this shows up in relationships, right? This is why the 7-year itch, it might be interesting for people. It's like,
Right.
who have I become? Am I becoming the person you want me to be, or am I becoming the person I want to be? And oftentimes we don't like the person that we've become, and we start to feel very agitated and betrayed and bitter, and God forbid that we point to ourselves as a responsible, actor in the person that we're becoming, and we look to the other and we say, well, of course it's you. You've done this to me. And it's in those moments where we're either going to bet on the relationship and bet on how we can become better together, or we start to blame. And so bet on or blame is an interesting framework in relationships as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a slippery slope to not become a parody of yourself on the way to mastery.
Oh, God, that is so good. Yes, yes, yes. I love that framing.
I want to talk about the voice inside. The voice inside is often much louder than the voice we see online or in other components of it. I think it's core to what you're talking about with FOPO, because even another person's opinion could be another voice in your brain, I actually think. One of the books I loved years ago, and I've had him on the show as well, is Ethan Kross, who wrote the book called Chatter.
Oh yeah,
The
he was
voice.
great. Yeah,
Great.
I had you and I both had him on our podcast. Isn't he
He's great.
great? He's so good.
Love him. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? I would wonder, and I was thinking about this as I was reading the first rule of mastery, that I wonder if that's not the first opinion you have to be very cautious of.
Yeah, so let's do this as well. The subtitle of the book is Stop Worrying About What People Think of You.
Right.
It is not Stop Caring.
Right.
So there is a small cadre of people, and I think about it more like a round table, that's got maybe 8 seats at it. Those are the ones that have demonstrated that they care. So I need to care about their opinions. Like,
Right.
and for me, there's a cross vector that they've dedicated to understand me. They've dedicated their time and resources to understand me, that there's an investment, and they've been in the arena. They've demonstrated that, like, they put themselves out there in some kind of way. Those are the 2 vectors for me that are really important.
Love those.
And yeah. And so to your point, so it's caring about the opinions of people that do care. We'll just kind of simplify it that. And then the other way to think about it, to your point, is when somebody says something and it's like a lightning bolt, or it's like it's a hot wire right to an original wound of yours. It is important to notice that it's not so much what they said, it's what that statement did, whether they're on the round table or not.
Right.
And so that inner process is very important to understand how you work. And we all have some original insults that we, happen between the ages of like 0 to 2 and 0 to 12. And like, no one gets through this world without trauma.
No, it's always our parents' fault. We know.
It's always in some respects,
right. They either did too much or too little. That's how we resolve all psychology at the end, right? Yeah.
It's
therapy,
so fun.
rather. Yeah.
Yeah. And so so when something outside of you is said to you and it hits a live wire and you barely know that person, it's not to play to their approval, which is the brain's reflex, okay, for safety, but rather to take a beat and say, oh, look, that's charged. Where does that come from? And what am I going to do with that right now? And what will I do with that in 12 hours when I have more contemplative time? So say you say something and I get fired up and heated, or maybe I get small, and I'm noticing that I'm having an emotional reaction to it. I need to do something with it in the moment. That's where investing in mental skills is such an important part of becoming. And then to know that I'm going to be able to park that and work with it later in a contemplative way, whether it's journaling or conversation with a psychologist or meditation. And being able to balance between those two, I think, is very, very important. That's part of the inner skill.
But what about the voice at 2 a.m? The one that you go up and go to the bathroom and look in the mirror and go, it's tomorrow. This big thing, this moment. Mm-hmm. Am I? Can I? Will I? The self-doubt. Can you talk about that chatter, the internal voice that's constantly playing devil and angel on both sides? How do you become mentally buff for that?
Awareness. It begins with awareness. Before anything else, it's awareness that you've got a monologue, a dialogue. It's awareness that you've got both angels, devil and the angel, or whatever framing you want to have, the thorn and the rose, whatever it is. Like, you've got this narrative, and one of the narratives is trying to protect you, and the other narrative is trying to propel you. And so I was spending time with an artist who's going to be on Saturday Night Live in a handful of weeks. I won't give the name or any of that. And it's this simple little framing. So she's working through her self-talk. And I said, if you had a girlfriend and somebody was talking shit about her, and it was wrong, it was not cool what they were saying about her, what would you do? She's like, oh, I'd have their back. Perfect. So do you have your own back?
Oh, great.
Okay. And so can you back yourself? And so at the moment that you're aware that you've got these different type of mechanisms, protect or propel, and you've got these mechanisms that are taking place, can you see the protector? Can you see that part of you that's just trying to keep you safe and alive? And you know what? Not going on stage will keep you safe. It's cool. Play to the center. Just fit in. That's fine. It's not the good life. It's the safe life. And then can you recognize that that mechanism is in place because you've had trauma, you've been embarrassed, you've had moments in your life that have been unbecoming. And there's a protective mechanism that is reminding you, hey, this is dangerous. Maybe you haven't prepared enough. Maybe you're going to blow it again. So it's okay to have that, but what are you going to do with it? And I don't think the right strategy is shut the fuck up. I don't think that's the right strategy, is like, and then to take that narrative and say, look, what am I doing? Why am I so hard on myself? What is wrong with me? I'm never. So that's taking a negative and compounding on another negative. But the idea is like, just become aware. And I don't think you can be on the path of high performance nor the path of mastery without a rich investment in awareness. And I'll hit those 3 strategies of awareness development again: mindfulness, journaling, or conversations with people of wisdom. And the more aware you become, then you can deploy an appropriate, fitting, powerful skill or tool. And those psychological skills and tools, you can train them. Just like you train your physical body or your technical skills with sets and reps, time under tension, if you will, you can do the same for self-talk. And again, oversimplify, begins with awareness, and then you've got the ability to navigate from there.
When you hear people talk about success, what do they mean? Do you know what a definition of success is? I'm so fascinated with this because people often say to me, Mitch, you're so successful. And I really, I don't think you know what my definition is or context is at all.
I love that. It's so individual specific, and it's culturally embedded. And that culture happens both from a region across the world, as well as the culture of the neighborhood or the family or the street block, that you grew up. So it's so bespoke and individual. And just the other day, just for fun, and I want to kind of like ask you the same question. Somebody asked me, like, what is your definition of success? And it's not like I don't have a rigid definition. It's definitely not outcome based. It's more experience based. And the way it came out the other day, and I just love this, is that, so I have a 15-year-old son, and success for me is having an adult relationship with my son at a later time. Like, I think about if I'm afforded to keep living and he's afforded to keep living, that one day having like an adult relationship with him feels awesome. I didn't get that with my dad. I love my dad. He's still alive, but I don't have the relationship that I want to have with my son. And so, but that's experience based. It's not outcome or productivity based. I think we're leaving productivity and achievement kind of like the way of the dodo. And I think that model that was introduced in the 1940s is fading away pretty rapidly. And so anyways, I'll pause there, but I would love to hear your definition of success as well.
I look at it more like It's a stool with three legs, and it is your personal experiences, your professional experiences, and your community experiences. And are they being enriched? And I know when it's off because the stool will topple over. I'm not spending enough time contributing to my community. I'm not spending enough time with my family. I'm not, and I can, so I look at success as having that balanced stool. But it's hard for me not to reflect on being younger and aligning it with some type of financial outcome. And there is a truth, if I'm being honest, that when I had financial freedom, that felt like a huge step towards success for me because it then afforded me the ability to really put the pedal to the metal on those other things, which is where I was going originally with the question around privilege. That there's
That's really
something
cool.
in there.
Yeah, and I think what we were both pointing to is the way that you spend your time. And so success is some sort of alignment of time. And if you had, 100 million in the bank and you had your, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. gig that you were working every day, and you really didn't find it meaningful or impactful, you didn't like the people you worked with, and you don't really know your children, and you're donating $1 million to some charity a year, but you don't know the impact of that work. This isn't the, it has something to do with time and the way that you experience your time, which is like, I'll just kind of go on a thread here, is that I am far more interested above anything else is unlocking the potential that lies dormant in people. And the unlocks happen in the present moment. So time happens, time is happening. And can you be on time with time is what it means to be fully present. And the unlocks, high performance happens in the present moment. The artistic expression of mastery happens in the present moment. So does wisdom. That's where it's revealed. So is where relationships are formed. So where the experiencing of things that are true and beautiful and amazing happen. So it's like, can we increase the frequency of our ability to live in the present moment more often? So the frequency to be in the present moment is definitely the substrate of the good life. And if you follow the Harvard study, which I'm sure you're well aware of, the 75 to 80 year study in Harvard of what the good life is, they're pointing to two things: purpose and relationships.
Yeah. Community is a big part of it too, right?
That's
the
it.
community you spend your time. But it makes me wonder if we're getting it wrong, because you then look at the inputs and they're so off of that. I could make the argument that if I go on TikTok, I could follow great minds like you and others. There's no doubt. But the vast majority of it is this very superficial, weird thing.
Oh,
even
yeah,
beauty
like
filters.
cat
Just think about what a
humor.
beauty filter is. It's
Yeah.
wild that we even have that. How do we talk to the younger generation? How do we talk to our peers in a way that's meaningful? Because I wonder that it feels like every metric is still about how much money did they make, how popular they become, how many followers. Like there still seems to be these strange metrics that we do pursue.
Well,
like the how many versus who type of thing is how I used to talk about it, right? It's not like who I'm speaking to, but how many people am I speaking to? I don't know.
Yeah,
Does it matter?
that's cool. Yeah, there's something happening right now, and there's a recency bias that I'm going to share with you because it was a conversation I had yesterday. And okay, so pre-pandemic, freshmen in college, both males and females, females a little bit more alarming rate, increase in suicide, depression, anxiety, and addiction. An alarming increase. We talked about this already. Post-pandemic or during pandemic and post, it's even more radical of an increase. So, okay. The now generation, the kids that are like sophomores in high school, let's call them, they're swinging in the other direction. They're seeing their older brothers and sisters have what their our peers, our I'm 50 years old, like our folks that were saying, look, grind, get into a good school, enjoy your life, da 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 da, and then they're falling apart like into 1,000 pieces. A healthy majority of them, or a noticeable, alarming majority of them. Wait, strike the word majority. It's not the majority, but it's an alarming rate of them.
Yeah.
are not living well. So there's this counter rotation that's taking place right now. And the conversation I had just with a friend of mine, his daughter's a sophomore in high school, and she is one of the best volleyball players in the nation. Okay. And he's like, but I don't get it, Mike, because she wants to go to a good school, not a great school, but a good school, and a program, a volleyball program that is good, but not great. So she doesn't want to go to Stanford, and because their volleyball program is like high standards and high expectations on both academic and sport. So she just wants to kind of settle into the good life a little bit differently and be at a good school. And I think that there's a rotation that's happening. It doesn't mean that we're seeing this downtick in time spent on TikTok, the dumbing of the American way, the potential, if there's a conspiracy theory or not here, I don't know, but the Chinese investment in dumbing down the American way. I see you nodding your head, but I don't know if that's actually, if you believe in that as well.
I think there's a lot of cultural inputs that are changing our perspectives. And I think that a lot of those cultural inputs are leading to what someone like Douglas Murray would call the war on the West. This idea of, while America, I mean Canada being some type of global superpower, is now having values infiltrated from other regions, whether it's the Middle East, India, China, that are playing at a even a bigger level, maybe, into who we are and what we believe. And that in the spirit of trying to keep this world global, we may in fact be really hurting other individuals' cultures.
So Mitch, let me ask you a more provocative question. What grade would you give the United States of America on the good life? And what grade would you give our global community?
Oof. I think it's hard to argue when you visit the US, which I do frequently, that there is something unique there. Shane Gillis, I think his name, is a very well-known comedian now on Netflix. He starts off his special with like, "You ever been to other countries?" It's like you want to go over them, like slide up them at a pool bar and be like, "Come on, this is your thing." Like, America's great. And I do think, as a Canadian, there's just something about the spirit of that. And I've traveled the world, and I think globally we were on a better path. But something has happened and we've changed, again, politically, nationalistically. Maybe it's fear based, maybe it's just real based because we're exposed to so many different things. But I feel that globally we're becoming more insular and closed than ever before, and retreating to more primal types of tribalism. And that's concerning to me. But there are regions clearly that have, high levels of excitement and happiness.
Okay, so I didn't realize that you were based out of Canada, so that's why I was referencing the United States. But so give the U.S. a grade, give Canada a grade, and then give the global community a grade.
I think global and Canada would be similar. Are we talking out of 100? Like, how are we doing out of 100?
Yeah, like a grading system: A minus, A plus, A.
Yeah, I think America's slipping into the low B's and C's, and I think it was an A for a long time. I think Canada was probably in the D's and is rising a little bit, C's and B's. And again, globally, that's a tough one. I'm not sure globally. I said before, I think Canada and the global might be the same, but now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder.
Oh, that's super interesting, because I give the U.S. a D minus, and I think we're I'm sorry, a C minus D is what I give, and I think we're sliding to
I agree.
Yeah, so I think we're sliding. In Canada, I've been fortunate enough to be across the border a lot in my life, and Whistler and Vancouver on the West Coast, and Toronto. They're some of my favorite cities, and so I've always elevated Canada.
Yeah, I think it's moving up for sure.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah,
right. There's you've got unique challenges as well, and then globally though, we got Bhutan. Bhutan's killing it. That's a
Finland,
weird way of saying it.
Right? Like, yeah, Finland is doing great, right? We always hear about Finland, and the school system's great, right?
Right. So the Nordics, they've like happy, Nordics, good life in a lot of ways. Bhutan, their main export is happiness. That's pretty damn good in a lot of ways. So but globally, when you just kind of put it all together, C minus too, C
Yeah,
minus
it's
as well.
feeling rough. It's feeling rougher too. I mean, we're in a poly crisis. It's hard not to just look at that and feel like the world's getting smaller and the walls are creeping in.
Yeah, 1,000%, especially with all the geopolitical stuff that's happening in the East and the wars and like or the Middle East. So yeah, it's a concerning, alarming time. So not to be on the pessimistic side of things, but I think it's really important to honor. This is the way I construct many of my sentences, is that I'll honor the facts or the truth of the way I see a situation, and then I add a comma and tag um, an optimistic frame of how I think about the future. So
Yeah.
I'm identifying the conditions that I'm seeing right now, comma, and I'm pointing to this. So the good life, if you will. And so this is where I go, okay, yes, and the comma is, we haven't even scratched the surface of human potential.
Right.
In grade school, high school, university, we don't teach people how to train their psychological skills. We pour into academic knowledge, we pour into critical thinking, but we do not teach confidence as a fundamental skill. And that is a fundamental skill that you can train. We don't teach calm. We don't teach optimism. We don't teach emotional regulation, arousal regulation. We don't teach emotional intelligence. Those are all skills that can be developed and cultivated. Yeah. And that's what the elite in sport have pulled me into their rooms for the last 25 years, saying, right, we want to be calm, confident. We want deep focus, optimism. We want to know how to trust ourselves and trust our teammates. What are the skills that we build? Well, it's breathing, self-talk, meditation, imagery, Okay. So when do we get that into the grade schools? When do we get that into the formation years? And you and I are struggling as adults. Like, what is the good life? How do we live it? We're asking each other, thoughtful questions, when really it's like, are you building the capabilities? Are you training the substrate of the quality of your mind so that you can artistically express and be authentically you across any condition, any environment? And so, like, do you have a meditation practice? Do you deploy your imagination towards seeing the best version of you later and the best version of others later? Do you have a clear vision? Are you using your self-talk to have your back, to take care of you and others? Are you doing breathing training to know how to down-regulate? Can you name the 300 emotions, and can you work with 6 of them at least? Let alone the 2 that most people try to work from. So that's where we have to point to, I think, this is what elite athletics is, about 15 years ahead of big business, and then light years ahead of people that are not in one of those sophisticated environments. And big sport has, for the last 20 years, definitely last 15, said we need mental skills training in the rhythm of our business.
Yeah.
And that's what's starting to take place now.
Yeah, I worked with some former Olympians, and the biggest challenge that I was given by the association that was leading this was, when a lot of them are done, and a lot of them are done before they get professional, right? If they hit even on an Olympic podium, they're not necessarily professional, and careers end without much, meaning they've achieved or haven't even podiumed, but ultimately they spent 7 days a week, several hours a day doing something. And there's socialization stuff. There's all sorts of factors there too. So you even see this weird other side, which is often these people don't know what to do when they're post this high level of performance and training, which I think ties into what you're saying about our mental capacity and how we do it. And the other thing that made me think about is when you're talking about those values and how you put them out. One of my cheats with AI and ChatGPT is, when I write something, I'll often input it and ask it to give me the opposing perspective.
It's so good. That's such a great strategy.
It's really interesting to read, because one is you'll catch a couple things in your work, which is really fun too. But often you don't realize how your own confirmation bias or filter bubbles are working. And again, having access to those tools to give you the other perspective is really huge. How often do you think about the Roman Empire, Mike?
Oh, I don't know. That's an interesting question. How often do I think about the Roman Empire? I think about the rise and fall.
Have you heard about this meme? Have you heard about this? Have you, or not?
No, I don't know where you're going.
This is a very big meme on TikTok where Women typically are asking their spouse or partner, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And the answer is sometimes multiple times a day or several times a week. And they're just blown away by this idea. And it's this
Oh, how
massive thing,
fun.
and it's
Yeah.
transcended everywhere. I was asking it more in a playful way of like being a performance guy. Is that something we talk often
Oh,
about?
that's funny. No, and I was going to take it like seriously and like
Do you think about it? It would be
not multiple
interesting.
times a day, but I do think about the rise and fall of civilizations. Like I
Right,
do
me too.
think about that, and like the Romans kicked ass. There was a lot of good. There was a lot of savagery, and then they they lost their way. And so, anyways, that's
It's
funny.
just, yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with actually Ryan Holiday and just the fact that he's put out Stoicism. It's become so mainstream that people are just talking about it more. But tell me, what's the one thing that made you think differently, that really made you change your perspective versus some previously held beliefs?
There was. I'm fortunate to have a mentor from the age of 15, and he said something to me at an early age, and he said, Mike, your job in life is to know that you matter, and in the grand scheme of things, know that you don't matter very much at all.
Right,
And so it's the complexity of those two ideas that I feel like set me down this path of where I could have like poured into this narcissistic, anxiety, obsessive about like performance, where he held this space to say, no, you matter in the lives of people because like you care and but in the grand scheme of like the 6 billion years and the couple $100,000 or 100,000 years of modern civilization, like, come on, get with it. And so that helped, that duality helped to set me down a path of expansive thinking as opposed to narrow-minded thinking.
Oh, it's a great way to think about how your career unfolds when you can actually embrace that duality, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I love that question.
The new book is called The First Rule of Mastery. You've also got a great podcast out called Finding Mastery. By the way, we should mention that your co-author is Kevin Lake as well. Mike, let people know where they can find out more about the book, all the good things you're doing.
Well, the podcast is a fun way. Like just like yours, it's a wonderful community. So Finding Mastery, available everywhere. And then findingmastery.com, you can find all of our resources and some bundled services that we have, which is cool. And the book is available everywhere as well. And of course, not only is it cool to say, but I really mean it, like buying at a local bookstore is pretty cool. But it's available everywhere, Amazon and.
Buying it in bulk is even better, is what I tell people.
Yeah, that's so good. And then if you add, say, buy it in bulk and write a review, like all of that obviously like really helps. So anyways, listen, I've really appreciated the thoughtfulness in the way that you've created space and drilled right into some center ideas. So thank you, Mitch, for including me in your community.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time, Mike.
Take care.